Benton here. Still waiting to start the day. Truck driving. Gave a little impromptu sermon to a fella in the bathroom. I know that sounds funny. It was interesting. Having some thoughts, some spiritual thoughts, right? Thinking a lot this morning about, the idea of serving God. Again, air quotes, so-called, right? It's important to be specific. But there is a thing when speaking, with the general public or when being listened to by the general public where, it is possible to use the term God and, people will assume that means Heavenly Father, man in the sky, creator. Whether or not that's actually what it means or functions as. I'm doing many things simultaneously, so bear with me. We're doing laundry, so in about 10 minutes, I need to go in and fold the clothes, 10 to 15 minutes. Then we got an hour 20 to start the clock to do the 15-minute pre-trip. And I don't know that tired or fatigued is the right word for what's going on. Resigned. What's up, Obadiah Hakeswill? Who could this be? It's a name on a screen in a chat. Is that a person? What is that? Obadiah, though. And how much of this world is world of death and game of lies? It's interacting with people that we will never know, right? We, whatever that is, or that the individual, looking at a person and hearing a voice, in the physical. And is that really that much different than, oh, we're live on YouTube and there's a name in a chat, and what does that represent? What is brought to the person's mind by reading a name? Obadiah, what is it? Hakeswill. Yeah. And again, not to make anybody feel any type of way, but well, trucking is dead, and it belongs to a world of death and a game of lies. So I guess as much as one's activities that are involved with various forms of death and dying could be said to be good, and then I myself have all of these things that I reflexively say to people, my father also does this. There's a lot of just hearing somebody refer to something and then, oh, well, that's good, right? Or then maybe something sounds negative and sort of like a furrowing of the brow, and oh man, sorry to hear that. And then how much of that is the cult, the cult dynamics of society, right? Society as a cult. Increasingly, I'm seeing things more and more along those lines. As a truck driver, with all of these notions around, well, it's an important job, it's productive, it supports the economy, it's keeping America moving. It's like, well, does a world of death move? Is something that's is a phenomenon that's based on the lack of life, is that even movement? And remember, it's question everything is the conventional wisdom, which is really a way of saying don't question nothing, right? Question nothing, accept everything. What messages are sent. And so I just delivered a compacted, spontaneous sermon to the young fella, probably in his 20s, truck driver. Seemed to be American. Hard to tell. Seemed to be American. And I think I started it out talking about, serving God or money, right? And it's hard to remember. I'm not good at remembering the flow of the conversation, and it wasn't a conversation. I did most of the talking. But the theme of it was how it's not possible to serve both money or consumer society and, air quotes, so-called God, although I just said God because, didn't really have the time to get into these distinctions. And then it is fairly easy to put things into a, Judeo-Christian, I don't even like that term, but as far as a biblical context, and probably this fellow was, raised in some sort of a Christian or biblical context. And something that almost never happens when I was done, he said, I never thought about it that way, which is, it's something that I've often noticed in, delivering some sort of spontaneous lecture or discourse. Generally people want to put their own 2 cents in instead of listening to a message, and then again, many people lacking trust of where is this going? Why is this person telling me this? And then even listening and saying, well, I never thought about it that way, because part of it is that, the enemy or Satan or the God of this world, antithesis, whatever we're calling it, it doesn't care if a person is a good person, meaning, if society says, well, we're all good people, we're all in this together, that's completely fine. The enemy or antithesis has no issue with that. Do all the good you want to do in your life, in your community. The only thing antithesis cares about is which of those 2 masters do you serve. And in fact, it's not antithesis that says man can't serve 2 masters. In fact, it seems like a lot of what is happening in the world of death and the game of lies is actually involved with a psychological schism where the person, just simply by virtue of accessing employment and paying taxes, inarguably serves evil. Anybody with a W-2 job in this country directly serves evil called the government. And it's not man's government necessarily. Does man own and operate the government? I guess that depends on what is meant by man, right, or mankind. It certainly seems to be inarguably operated based on the influence of, the wicked one, the evil one, Satan, antithesis, whatever we're calling it, the lack of life, the lack of authority, the lack of abundance, the lack of substance, the lack of justice. Again, inverted world. Inverted world purports itself to be wondrous and free and full of opportunity, and it's an abundant world, and that's all gaslighting. See, that's all to gaslight the individual, to say, well, what's wrong with you? See, why haven't you boldly strode out into the world stage and cut your path, and performed and pulled yourself up by your bootstraps? And why haven't you done these? Or maybe you have done those things. So to follow the teachings of the Lord Christ Jesus from the Holy Bible is to say, well, in a way, it's to say, well, that's not purpose, that's not meaning, that's not authority, that's not life, that's not abundance, to go out here and have a W-2 job and pay taxes, and to haul, in my case, to haul freight, even though I'm not on a W-2, to haul freight to and fro here and there, right? So that a owner of a trucking company can try to get rich, whatever his version of rich is. Rich here based on death, right? Again, render unto Caesar, an attempt to gather for himself a certain amount of these, mammon, or these symbols and instruments of death, a lover of death. What better way, what more effective means of actively loving death, as a sort of garish, ghoulish performance, than to, seek to make something of oneself in a vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, right? By, getting ahead and getting enough access to enough resources to live in a nice, a nice area, a home, to provide a certain, standard of living to the children, and all of these various things. Anyway, it's time to go follow the close. So I'll keep the discourse going as I'm able, but be aware the distractions may lead to some disjointedness. It's already it's already fairly disjointed so far, right? Breaker 1-9. See, Obadiah says life is a journey to death. I disagree. What I am is life. Sorry, Obadiah. So I would say that to refer to the experience of leaving the mother's womb and entering into this place, it's not correct to refer to that as life. That's in fact the beginning within the context of delusion and illusion, because always having to resolve for waking dreams, surrealistic unreality, deja vu all over again. It's in fact this experience, speaking from my own perspective, it can't correctly be called life. That's erroneous. So I use the framework as life as the breakfast cereal. Mikey likes it. If anybody remembers the old TV commercial. That's my view of what, because this world gave us a concept of life from a young age. The child, as the child grows and matures, the child did not form a shit. Spilled part of the egg drink. Fortunately, it wasn't a total disaster, but lost some percentage of it. Set the cup on the step and then got out and stepped on it. Stepped on the step. Amazing. Who would have thunk it? Yeah, the lid saved most of it, I would say. And so one of the major violations that I see in my life, I just did it, in my experience or collection of experiences within delusion, is to take this thing as presented and to call it, well, it's a life, like the movie The Truman Show. That's what, the director is being interviewed in the movie about, the project of The Truman Show. And he says, it's a life, right? And in some way, that's a reference to any human being, so-called, and the course of their existence here. If that makes sense. So I would say that when I've referred to the mind control that's built into the system and the realm, look at just the basic and simple premise of referring to the experience as life. When, by definition, when the baby leaves the mother's womb and enters into this place, that begins a process of dying. So it seems to me like calling it death is more accurate than calling it life. So now we have another inversion. See, It's death inverted and called life. And I myself am constantly, reminding myself of that. One day, perhaps it will get sunk in, deeply, but not yet. So constantly correcting myself on the fly. And then, who wants to live that way? Who wants to exist in that state of a constantly, error correcting on the fly? That's, where's the enjoyment in that? The vigilance, the intelligence required, and then invariably getting swept away anyway, right? No matter how ardently the individual practices and disciplines themselves, will still get swept away, And then what is the motivation or benefit in relation to this world to even being correct, right? Benton can be correct and sleep in a ditch and, beg for his supper, right? Give us this day our daily bread type shit, right? And subsist at a very meager level, or just sort of go along the mind control and, the so-called conventional wisdom of society, right? And not really be rewarded, because that's not acceptance. Again, this world's version of acceptance and love is never love and acceptance. It's always the withholding of love and acceptance and blasting the individual with guilt, fear, and shame via mockery and ridicule. And then if the person, at the level of status quo upholds the various social contracts via the peer groups, then okay, this world of death removes not all, removes some of the fear, guilt, and shame, and does less mocking and ridiculing. And then that also, as covered by other folks, that triggers the in-group, out-group dynamics of, okay, now the being gets to join the peanut gallery and blame everything on, Biden's poopy diaper or whatever, and to laugh and point. And the movie Idiocracy does a really good job of bringing all that out, especially the courtroom scene. But there's a lot of mockery and ridicule used, even as the main character, played by Luke Wilson, is pretty much considered the most intelligent man in the entire realm. There's a lot of making fun of the way he talks, right? Things like that. Because anything that fails to conform to, again, status quo and social contract is mocked and ridiculed. But what does the state in the movie Idiocracy? What was the result of status quo and social contract? It was that the food wouldn't grow because corporations were so unchecked and out of control that they were putting salt on the crops because of the electrolytes in Brondo, because the populace had been brainwashed into, Brondo's the best thing ever because it's got electrolytes, And the notion that this is just, it's a comedy or it's somehow unreal. Well, yeah, it is unreal, but again, waking dreams, surrealistic unreality, it's not that different than the world of death and game of lies. It's a satire of the world of death and game of lies. See, and it can show people that, hey, this is the world that you die in, because to call it living is not even correct. This is, again, it's a process of dying. This is not a process of living, right? What I am is the life. It has no need of a vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions in order to have validity or express itself. In fact, this is a in spite of, So in a lot of ways, the warrior path or the spiritual warrior path is to, take all of these things on and to still express the life that is what I am, and to not falsely identify with this place. Because this place says, well, if you don't go along with what we decide is proper, then, at the end, the other humans will, they won't honor a life well lived necessarily. And you see this with like Jimmy Kimmel. I find interesting because I used to be a big Adam Carolla podcast fan. And so a lot of people don't understand Adam Carolla got his start in entertainment directly through Jimmy Kimmel. And then they also have this notion of Adam Carolla as a so-called conservative, which is simply not the case, right? And then to even place oneself into that framework of left, right, conservative, so-called liberal is ridiculous foolishness in the first place, as far as I'm concerned. But he's certainly not a so-called conservative, not even close. Man's been an avowed atheist his whole life. Right. He grew up in Southern California. He did not move to Orange County, to Huntington Beach. He could have. He did. It's from the valley. Either way. So because of the woke politics of Jimmy Kimmel, a lot of people are confused in the YouTube comments. Well, I'll tell you what's relevant in a world of death and a game of lies that also needs to be reconciled for if anybody is confused about Jimmy Kimmel. Jimmy Kimmel makes $15 million a year. That's his salary. That's his job pays him $15 million a year. And that's the most relevant factor. If anybody thinks that's not the most relevant factor with respect to how Jimmy Kimmel, air quotes, lives his life, that shows you that your average person has absolutely no understanding of what's happening. None whatsoever. People who are considered otherwise intelligent, just no clue. And they seem to subscribe to a notion that it's possible to negate and tear down and ridicule and mock an individual for their politics. That's not possible when the individual is being rewarded with $15 million a year. See, the $15 million a year for working one job in entertainment, that absolves Jimmy Kimmel of any other wrongdoing in the context of the vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions. Jimmy Kimmel's net worth is $50 million. Why would he give a flying fuck that a certain segment of the population considers him null and void and fallen and wicked and mockable, right? Because based on the principles that this system of things upholds, I haven't seen a single person criticize Jimmy Kimmel who's on Jimmy Kimmel's level. Every single person who criticizes Jimmy Kimmel is nowhere near his level of accomplishment and success. So now it's like, well, wait a minute, what do you mean success? Because in this realm, Jimmy Kimmel's life is a smashing success, whether people like that or not. That's the reality. That's a smashing success. And then we get into the so-called conservatives who don't understand, because then they want to add a moral high ground and say, well, okay, but it's negated because he doesn't uphold certain moral principles. And then I say, aha, Neither do any of the people who are accusing him. They also don't uphold those principles. So they're on the same level with him when it comes to not living up to the principles, but it's based on a negation. Because when you have a group of people, none of them are upholding proper moral principles, and pretty much everybody has a job and serves financially through a wicked system of things, games of lies in a world of death. They're the same as Jimmy Kimmel morally, whether they want to face that or not. But so that's where the mockery and the ridicule and the accusations come. It's the Biden's poopy diaper. Oh yeah, but he has these woke politics. Yeah, did you ever think that the $15 million is directly tied to the woke politics? Because the prince of the power of the air, this wicked system, somebody on ABC that's putting out certain viewpoints and certain propaganda, and that whoever makes that 15 million is going to do what the corporation demands. You know, how is it 2025 and people don't understand that a corporation? And meanwhile, the movie Network came out in 1976 and talks about a lot of these dynamics, right? Especially with the Howard Beale character in that movie. And folks haven't even learned those lessons, and that movie is almost as old as I am. See how it works? But there's no moral high ground, because a person who devotes their day to serving a vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions in order to have access to resources and in order to sustain themselves and in order to provide for themselves and their families, it's not based on moral principles. That's not based on ethics. That's not based on what's right. That's starting with the premise of everybody must go out there and access employment in order to earn money, which is what is money? Mammon. So then you have what's purported to be historically a Christian nation, and it's one nation under Mammon, but they call it one nation under God. So it's right. It's hidden in plain sight. It's one nation under the God of Mammon. Right. So in the context of one God, one nation under the God of Mammon, Jimmy Kimmel is one of the most successful people that's ever lived. And it's like, whoa, man, no. Because the people who falsely believe themselves to be upholding certain moral principles, they falsely believe they can negate somebody and say, well, actually, he's not accomplished because morally the words that come out of his mouth don't line up with the words that come out of our mouth. So if the conservatives say, well, we espouse the proper rhetoric, we enter into the church building, we raise our children with certain beliefs and we tell them certain things, and then we teach them to define themselves based on business and money and transactions, and everybody more or less goes off to a job every morning that pays into a system of things that perpetuates unmitigated evil on just a nightmarish, hellish scale. So how can a person look at Jimmy Kimmel and not understand that based on what this world honors and considers important, he's way better at playing these games than anybody criticizing him, and the people criticizing him are all playing the same game Jimmy Kimmel's playing. It's just that their peer groups have different sociological makeup. The status quo and the social contract, it's a different status quo and a different social contract. Jimmy Kimmel, at a certain point in raising himself up through his career, moved into a different arena of status quo and social contract. And so now you have people who believe themselves to be conservatives who are raising their female children and their male children to serve, again, a wicked system, a world of death and a game of lies through money and jobs, and they're sending them off to university, right? And boomers still believe this idea that higher education is a way to a high income. No, it's not, and it hasn't been for quite some time. So a lot of what Jimmy Kimmel gets accused of is merely he's adapted to the new world that gets accused of being feminine. That's not right. It lacks masculinity. See, a male that exhibits a lack of masculinity, that's not feminine. That's an insult to ladies. That's not feminine. That's a male who lacks masculinity. So I'll tie this into the title of the stream. It's okay for now, because, you know, the reality is for Benton to continue handling money, right, and working a job, and the job requires me to do things that I know to be unethical, and that's just how it is, right? Or I can say to them, well, I'm just not going to do these unethical things. However, I would assert at this point that merely taking part in these financial transactions and the flow of money, what's the fucking difference? That's unethical. You know, why is there not a phrase called the ethical use of money, right? And some may say, well, tied to the church. Oh, okay. Give 10% to the thing that doesn't pay taxes but tells you to pay taxes. Okay, well, that probably is not the path, but whatever. I don't see how there's any future in that, you know. And then ultimately, am I willing and able to hold myself to a standard of these are my principles, they exist based on the teachings of the Lord Christ Jesus, and I understand based on the teachings that I can expect a certain level of spiritual attack. I can expect, you know, to be persecuted, right? Because of symbolically what is represented by somebody who at least part of the time, you know, lives and acts based on the teachings of the Lord Christ Jesus. See? And I don't mean in a dogmatic sense. I just mean the actual teachings, right? And following the example. And yeah, here's the thing is Benton doing that to some extent? Sure. Not all the way. That's called lukewarm. That's called a half measure, you know? And so then that's where we get to it's okay for now, meaning, well, Benton is doing the best he can based on the current level of understanding, right? While also at times used as a vessel or, you know, an implement of the spirit of what I am, which is one with the most super intelligent power, source, and force of love and creation. Again, what I am is the way, what I am is the truth, what I am is the life. It's not serving Jesus. It's not, oh, I love Jesus. It's not that. It's that what I am is love. God is love. The kingdom of love is within you. See, to actually understand, well, what does that mean? And then to trust, oh, feminine. Oh, you mean feminine? Right? Oh, feminine. But see, while the man or the male recognizes that in order to continue serving the vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, the reality is their boss at their job, you know, they're probably answering to a female increasingly, right? Increasingly, their wife has way more influence and way more power in the home than they do. Certainly, if you look at the court system and divorces and all of this. So, you know, a lot of this is the male is unable to deal with his own lack of masculinity, because if you look at how Jimmy Kimmel has maintained his success, process. It's by adapting to the new environment where uh, masculinity is no longer carrying the day. See, it's no longer setting the tone. In fact, the majority of the environments are feminine and are only going to become more feminine. See, so in truck driving, I wouldn't even consider that masculine necessarily, but certainly the fact that the guy that owns this trucking company, how can he be living proper masculine characteristics when, in order to be successful based on money, which is what we think of when we hear the word success, he has to do something that's a lack of masculinity or feminine, although I wouldn't call it feminine. See, but if some people would consider some of these things feminine, right? Well, what's more lacking in masculinity than to be taught from a young age proper morality and principles, and then to let a system of money and business take that away and make it to where it can't be practiced. So the person, and this is all psychological mind control and schism, it is the Orwellian ability to hold two seemingly opposing viewpoints simultaneously, right? It does function that way. So the person has been taught proper principles as a man, and then, especially an Eastern European, somebody from Lithuania or wherever, but then has come to America, where in order to, because of the opportunity, in order to become successful, they're going to be precluded from living those masculine principles. It's one or the other. That's where, and now we're back to the biblical concept of man cannot serve two masters. And to define oneself whatsoever based on money and transactions is to deliver oneself directly into the hand of the enemy. Period. And the enemy determines to what level does the individual get to come across as plausibly masculine. And that changes over time. To what degree does the individual get to come across as Christian or righteous or, living by certain principles, and to teach their children certain principles. But to then say, okay, child, now go make your way in the world of death. Go, turn your back on everything that you were taught to hold dear to go out there and make money. See, so are people angry with Jimmy Kimmel, or are they angry with what he shows them about themselves? Because he's simply playing the game that they're playing, and he's playing it much better than they are. Much better. And so he gets that's over $1 million a month to his pocket. Right? He has, however much his house is worth, right? Whoever his friends are, see, whoever he hangs out with, what does he get to do on his free time? How much free time does he have? All of these things. Is his day mostly stress-free? But yeah, there's this performative part where he's, he's triggered and he's woke and he's got Trump derangement syndrome. Yeah, it's all very performative. Meanwhile, the people who think that they're somehow successful because they can point at Jimmy Kimmel and say, well, at least I'm not that guy. Yeah, but what do those people perform? They perform Biden's poopy diaper. The laughing and the mocking and the ridiculing of people like Jimmy Kimmel who are actually successful, while they themselves work menial jobs and are more or less, from the perspective of the system, chattel, slaves, right? Even if they were able to have some sort of job security and maybe have something of a retirement, but how much of that is based on principles of living below their means, right? As if that's somehow honorable, right? To live below one's means. No, that's what the being was mind controlled to do. It doesn't make it honorable, right? Because the moment society shifts Here you go having people who consider themselves honorable, and they're sending their children off to university to be indoctrinated by the very people that they think that they are better than when they make fun of Biden's poopy diaper, right? Oh, okay, we'll send your children off to Biden's poopy diaper to be indoctrinated and educated by communists, by leftist Marxist communists, right? So what even is this? And symbolically, everybody knows that this is what's happening. And so, are they angry with Benton, or are they angry with themselves? Are they angry with Jimmy Kimmel, or are they angry with themselves? Right? Because it's not possible to live in a capitalist society and to listen to Donald Trump talk about how much he loves money, right? And how much, it's the success of America and these economic engines, and he claims to be a Christian, right? And then to say, well, Donald Trump is successful, right, in serving mammon. Well, he's unsuccessful when it comes to serving, air quotes, so-called God, or this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. If Donald Trump, the human being, which, I'm seeing human being as more and more of a pejorative and not this great thing that we're taught that it, is supposed to represent. But, it's this idea that Trump is wonderful because, art of the deal, and, he's can get, concrete poured in Manhattan and all of these things. But it's still within the framework in which Jimmy Kimmel is successful. Now, some would say, yeah, but Donald Trump's way more successful. Okay, there you go. So does that mean, is it just going to come down to who has the most money, right? Or is it going to come down to spiritually, does each individual, to what degree are they able to bring forth, to access, understand, and bring forth their own nature? So that brings me back to, this is okay for now. It's okay for me to drive this truck and accept this certain amount of Federal Reserve notes and to live a certain lifestyle. That's okay today, right? Meanwhile, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, other ways of living are okay, but they're not okay now, right? The way I was living in the past, it was okay at the time. And you never would have convinced me that I wasn't living properly, right? Maybe I had goals and I understood that I had a desire to progress spiritually and all of this, but, the individual, because of the way society operates through marketing and advertising, and Mad Men, the TV show Mad Men showed this about, advertising in a way is all about whatever the individual is doing at any given time. It's to make sure that they feel and understand that whatever it is that they're doing is completely appropriate, and that they are, holistically, they're whole and there's nothing wrong with them. And that's because they access certain products and services. And the way to access the products and services is by serving Satan. Literally, it's the literal service of Satan. So you have Donald Trump, servant of Satan, and you have Jimmy Kimmel, servant of Satan, and you have a portion of the populace who says that Jimmy Kimmel is a representative of everything fallen and wicked because of the way he serves Satan, but that somehow Donald Trump is uplifted and consecrated because of the words that he says while he's serving Satan. But the thing is, Jimmy Kimmel is serving the system's function and is serving Satan through his rhetoric, through what he espouses. He's doing that for a portion of the populace that so-called Christians falsely believe, okay, those people are rotten, evil, and wicked, and therefore we, meaning the in-group, is proper, above board and moral. No, it doesn't work that way, because that then introduced a logical fallacy where, because that group can creditably be called immoral, that must mean that our group is moral. That's not logical. That's a fallacy, because it's possible for both groups to be equally fallen, wicked, immoral, and both to actually be serving the same master, which is to serve Satan or antithesis via mammon, which is not just money itself. It's actually the desire for money. So when Donald Trump, on a video clip that I saw, strongly espouses a notion of how wonderful it is to be an American and have an ability to get rich, right? Even though it's not even really a thing. Christians can't see that that's him saying, hey, your function is to worship mammon, and not understanding that their own book says that they can't serve mammon and what they believe God to be, the creator, right? It's one or the other. Meanwhile, Satan doesn't care if the being serves their own idea of a heavenly father or a creator. Satan don't give a fuck. All Satan is worried about is the tree rotten? See, it's the spirit of what I am that says make the tree good or make the tree rotten. And the tree, it judges itself because the rotten tree brings forth the rotten fruit. There's no reason to judge it. It judges itself. See, inverted world says, well, this is a performance, and by the time the person gets to the end of the performance and they want to enter into the pearly gates, then God puts on his spectacles and starts going through the scroll and assessing every moment of their life. That's nonsense. They don't ever come to the pearly gates, metaphorically, because they're lovers of death and lovers of this world, and they are trapped here. They, by virtue of not being redeemable and not able to return to source, what I am is the way, what I am is the truth, what I am is the life, by cutting themselves off from that, there's no reason to judge them. They judge themselves. They condemn themselves. See? And this is the inversion. But that's one of the reasons church and religion is inserted, is to deal with all of these things that burble up in the individual, because the subconscious mind perfectly decodes all symbols, and it understands all of this on some level, even if the being can't resolve it or reconcile it or won't in their conscious mind. So mammon, the desire for wealth, personified as an evil spirit or malign influence. So part of what Trump's function is he takes that desire for wealth, and then he functions almost as like one of these prosperity preachers. And he's out there as a symbol of, hey, look at how great America is, because look at my own ability as Trump to gather all this wealth and to serve the people, right? And to seem to care about the people, right? And then while also people will say, well, he's not doing this as mammon, because they're saying, well, he can't possibly be influenced by evil spirits or a malign influence. And I'm here to say that's crazy. Why would anybody assume? Why would I just assume that anybody out here is acting from any pure intention, especially people who are being rewarded? But on the one hand, people will easily see, oh, well, Jimmy Kimmel must be evil, and look at how he's rewarded in Hollywood. But they don't then say, wow, look at Donald Trump, he must be evil because look at how easily, how well he does in business. Oh, well, art of the deal, he's just that much better than the competition. And so that's their own view of themselves, where they think that when the rubber meets the road, they're going to go out there and perform. See? And it's also an inability to see that competitively, and when it comes to hard work and it comes to paying attention to details, their own performance probably falls flat, right? So they want that big, powerful daddy of Trump to shield them and to pat them on the head and tell them that's going to be okay. And as long as they do this certain level of performance, then it's all okay. And then meanwhile, anything that feels bad or negative and unresolved in the internal space, well, make sure and point at Jimmy Kimmel and Biden's poopy diaper and Kamala and AOC and Nancy Pelosi, and have fun making memes about them. And Donald Trump actually leading the way and showing and teaching the boomers to some extent, like here's the proper use of all of these memes, right? And it also means wealth. So first you have the desire where it's personified as an evil spirit, but then number two is wealth, material avarice, or profit. And avarice is excessive or inordinate desire of gain, greed for wealth. And that's, nobody gets as wealthy. And again, I'm going to official fiction. Nobody gets as wealthy as Donald Trump in this system of things. They must have within them an excessive or inordinate desire of gain and greed for wealth. That's a requirement. See, inordinate desire for some supposed good. Even that, right? The inordinate desire. And that's the meaning of avarice. Even if it's seemingly good, right? You know, that's fascinating. I hadn't quite made that connection. But yeah. How about that? What do you think about that, folks? And so in my own life, it fairly quickly becomes about not gaslighting myself by applying fear, guilt, and shame to myself around my own, in the short run, inability to live these principles that I know to be righteous and true, but instead to trust that it's a progression, and that Benton, in the context of the performance, is always exactly where he's supposed to be, and is always guided and protected spiritually, and would never have been provided and guided into this opportunity for truck driving in this form unless this was appropriate. But then also having an ability to guilt trip myself if I choose to say, well, you know, Benton, that may be true, but Benton, you're falling short of the example of Christ. Well, the reality is I am not Jesus, and I shouldn't even say Christ. Benton ain't Jesus. That's the Son of Man. That's the dead flesh. See, Jesus means Son of Man and dead flesh. Jesus is Benton. That's a personality and a performer and a performance and a biography and a history. It's the Christ part. See, so Benton, in understanding that what he is what Christ was, right? In the context of a historical Jesus, it's the same thing. Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. Benton says, what I am is those things, right? Pretty close to the same concept. And, you know, Jesus said, no one comes unto the Father, meaning true knowledge of self, which is the kingdom of the Father is within you. So the same guy who said no one comes unto the Father except through me, well, that can't ever mean dead flesh, because you can't have death. Death can't be the thing that validates life. That would be like ignorance validating truth. That's not possible. That's a violation. And so these concepts become very hidden, nuanced, and coded by necessity, right? For many different reasons. And so and again, the spirit of what I am able to, you know, work with all of this and alchemize it and bring forth what? Ultimately, what is the goal? To bring forth good fruit. And that always happens by default, as long as the individual refuses or doesn't allow the tree to be made rotten. It's not a making of a proper tree. It's not a proper performance. It's to refuse as much as possible to participate in the improper performance, if that makes sense. To say, yeah, well, for now, this level of performance is okay and represents a good tree, but that's a process of making the tree good. Are not some trees, amongst all the good trees, aren't some better, right? So is that in fact actually a big part of the journey, or the progression is what's okay and appropriate today probably won't be okay and appropriate in a few years. And then it's going to be based on what is in the context of give us this day our daily bread, and in the context of the waking dreams to realistic unreality. This is what is provided today. So the truck driving is the daily bread, right? So sometimes that daily bread, maybe it has a little mold on it, right? Or maybe it's not quite adequate, or maybe it's got this problem or that problem, but it's still the sustenance. See? And unsurprisingly, it's presented to Benton in the form where it's not a W-2, right? But it comes along with, well, okay, Benton is not directly paying for the evil of the government anymore, but Benton is expected to bend the rules around, using the personal conveyance option. Well, I don't know which is better and which is worse, right? When we're judging the fruit, would it be better to go back to a company and pay federal income taxes and pay for all of this wickedness and evil and directly support wicked and evil, but to not have to bend the trucking rules, the rules of a dead industry? See? Or is it better to say, okay, well, this is not to fully live the teachings of Jesus, but it's a progression towards maybe eventually living them fully by at least, taking advantage of what's offered in a way to sustain the being, in the framework of the Son of Man or the dead flesh. See? And then to be able to, utilizing one's own intelligence and resources and faculties, to be able to do all of that on an ongoing basis on behalf of themselves, on behalf of me. See? Putting my name on it, performing, right? So it's not to do an imitation of Jesus, it's to be the first Benton, right? The only individuated, discrete Benton who, more often than not, righteously brings forth Christ consciousness into this vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, while always reconciling for waking dream, surrealistic unreality. Within a world of death and a game of lies, in the context of a process of dying. So as the being is dying, but what the being is can never experience death or no death, because what the being is never had a beginning and thus will never have an ending. One with that force, but within delusion. And apologies for eating on stream, but it is what it is at this point. I don't know what to tell you. We're on time constraints. Now, if I want to, I can just sit here and finish my live stream and not eat and not, distract myself folding my clothes and, not get myself in a fat hurry so that I spill part of my eggs, my egg drink. Or I can go with the flow and just sort of manage all this as I'm able to in the moment, right? Which one seems more appropriate? But then part of what the being was taught from a young age was to, serve the wicked system of things by having certain moral principles of honesty and integrity. And, now I need to go to do the best possible job for this trucking company, right? In an industry, a fraudulent industry that's never going to be above board. And none of these companies are above board. They're all fraudulent, right? All the corporations are fraudulent. All of them. It's all Sodom and Gomorrah. There's no righteous corporation. There's no righteous industry. There's no righteous business transactions. It doesn't exist. There's no possibility of transacting in money and then that's going to be a righteous transaction. It's not possible. It's not possible. Can't happen. So ultimately, the judging of the fruit or the bringing forth of the good fruit it's not that for the being to say, well, I'm just going to refuse to work a job. I'm going to refuse to pay taxes and I'm going to refuse to handle money. That's not bringing forth the resurrected, risen Christ within. That's sort of a backwards. That's starting from the end point and then trying to, put everything in place on the back. It's a backwards engineering. It's to trust and continue to evolve along a progression to where everything perfectly falls into place. And then one day the being looks at their life and says, wow, I no longer handle money. I haven't worked a job in quite some time, and I haven't paid any taxes in however long. And to realize that is to live like Jesus, right? Whereas in the short term, if I refuse to work a job and I refuse to handle money, and if I actually meet the standard of Jesus, now most likely that will lead to deprivation, and the very low level of, don't worry about what clothes you're going to wear. Don't worry about what you're going to eat, right? Which is the idea of just sort of, being a beggar, more or less. And just whatever's available is whatever's available. Well, in a way, working as a truck driver, this is to live as a beggar. I'm just taking whatever's available, right? This is what's available to me, and I'm taking it. How is it any different? But society has a view of it. See, and society does not have a very high opinion of the way I live as a truck driver. But because of social contract, it pretends to treat it a certain type of way, right? But I'm at a truck stop. When I see my fellow truckers, almost none of these people are healthy, mind, body, and spirit, are in a, putting out a good energy, right? Probably thinking good thoughts. And I'm not saying that I am necessarily, but it's not a thing. They're unhealthy, they're miserable, because that's what this system of this world of death and game of lies does. That's its fruit. Just look at the fruit of this system, and what more do you need to know? What more do you need to know? Just look at the fruit. Look at the people. Just look at them. Talk to them. Get to know them. That's the fruit, right? That's the fruit. And you tell me. So I know what I'm involved in. And it's not that much different than just living in the streets with nothing. It's really not that much different. Now, at least this way, in the short term, I'm able to continue putting the nutrients in my body so that my brain works. And, if it is, if my function at times is to give a really quick sermon to a fellow that, maybe that is a version of the seed that's planted on the proper ground, and who knows what that will grow into. It's not my business, but that's God's business, air quotes, so-called God's business. But it's to at least maintain myself in a state where I could be useful in a way, right? And so nihilism would then say, well, there's no external meaning in what you're describing, Benton. And it almost sounds like Benton is sort of attaching himself to an external meaning. That's not the case at all. It's the performance within the internal space, within the context of the vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, while refusing to define myself in relation to the world of death and game of lives to the best of my ability. So on some level, to even say, well, I'm a truck driver is a violation. No, part of Benton's performance has been as a truck driver. Part of the performance, right? Who cares? These are circumstances, mere circumstance. And at the end of the day, it all goes into one of two categories. Is it making the tree good, or is it making the tree rotten? And is the tree bringing forth good fruit or rotten fruit? That's it. That's all that matters. In one way of looking at it, anyway. Maybe not across the board, but you know, in one way of thinking. So ultimately, from my perspective, it doesn't matter if this freight gets delivered on time. It's already late. Or, well, probably should be getting delivered right about now. Oh, yeah, definitely late. It's 11:30. And we've got, I don't even know how many miles to go. Let's see. So I don't know if any of this will get delivered today. Because, and see how much of the information I'm being given is accurate. I have no idea. I know I'm being lied to by people who know they're lying to me. And those same people probably consider themselves to be good people because in order to raise their families and in order to exist within their own families and peer groups, they have to view themselves as good people, right? It's the individual who separates himself from society to a degree, because it's not possible to do that entirely. So I now see that part of my own separating myself from society to a degree was to have the space to be able to entertain the reality that the tree was rotten and the fruit was rotten. And to realize, oh, Benton has the opportunity to make the tree good and therefore become a so-called good person, which is what Benton committed himself to doing, many years ago, and is going to continue to do, right? But Benton has a propensity to be too hard on himself. And that's where we get to this is okay for now, right? It's to accept that, yes, Benton, you are hard on yourself and this ain't good enough. What you're doing is not good enough in the long run. It's okay for now. And then surprise, surprise, actually was able to somewhat normally use the bathroom. And I don't want to get to TMI, and I shouldn't be eating and talking at the same time, but I am. But I shouldn't be. This is not good for the digestion. It must be important though, whatever I'm on about and talking about. It must be important. It feels important. It feels proper. All right. It's getting closer to being that time. Well, it was a struggle last night driving. At a certain point, I stopped and took an hour-and-a-half nap because I started seeing double. Because I am not good at night driving if I've been up all day, and that's what they got me doing now is night driving after I've been up all day. It's going to be probably more of that today. Maybe not. We'll see. Maybe not. Let's see. Where are we going? That's where we're going. Going to Oklahoma. Six and a half hour drive. See, I don't think I can make it. Based on when they're telling me the unloading is, I don't think we can make it. I think we're going to have to get unloaded tomorrow. I think the 2 stops are going to get unloaded tomorrow, and I think the other 2 are going to get unloaded Monday. So what the owner of the company wants to avoid is he wants to avoid his truck sitting for 2 days, not making any revenue, right? Because he wants to average like $1,250 a day of revenue, right? Guess what? In business, that just simply is not always possible. He talked about, anyway, it doesn't even matter what he talked about. And then how much of that am I willing to internalize? Well, I will internalize. Here's what I'm willing to internalize is that based on it has to line up with my principles. My principles as a man and as a being in this world of death is that I will do the best job I'm able to do, but I do that for me because I don't give a fuck about this dude's revenue. Now, when I say that, that's not to say that I'm I am not in any way desirous that he loses income. My point is, he's the one that's chosen to try to get, render unto Caesar. He's the one that's chosen to worship death in a way by trying to, have a certain style of business and a certain, grow to a certain level through business. He's chosen to do that. And, he's decided for himself that is honorable or that it's, appropriate. That has nothing to do with me. I'm a person who is spiritually guided and protected, and this is the opportunity that's presented itself to me, right? I went on an app on my phone and I applied for a bunch of jobs, and this is the opportunity that presented itself amongst a few others. But this is the one, because I'm not going to the West Coast, because that's up to Benton. Benton says, well, we're not driving in California, Oregon, and Washington, and Wyoming. We're not going there. And people say, why not? Because I say so. Because I say I'm not driving across Wyoming in the winter in a blizzard with 100-mile-an-hour winds. I'm not doing that. If I wanted to do that, I would have done it by now. I don't want to do that, therefore I'm not going to. And so part of being, and I see I'm having some strong emotion tied into that, because it's probably my own innate desire or propensity to want to do the job properly. But then we get into managing expectations, we get into boundaries, and we get into, it's just this idea that I'm going to be whatever the world of death and game of lies demands that I be. Well, you know what I would be? You know what Benton would be if he was going to do that? Some version of Patrick Bateman from American Psycho. That's what Benton would be. Benton would just say, "Oh, you mean?" Benton would be strategic and say, "Well, okay, if it's true that what I'm supposed to do is go out here and do the best job I'm capable of in a world of death and game of lies, and compete and be ruthless and destroy my enemies and not worry about morality or ethics, and but always being worried about reputation and how am I seen, in order to pass myself off as a proper human." See, I would probably be really fucking good at it, or would have been, now maybe that's my own cope, who cares? But I am quite talented in certain ways, and disciplined and driven, but never had the ambition to get rich in this world. Guess who also never had that ambition? Because what Christ is or was can't have an ambition for death. So when we talk about, oh, well, maybe Trump's ambitious, or certain titans of industry, your Rockefellers, well, that's, those are ambitious men beyond normal ambition, right? Well, what I am can't be ambitious for death, because when we're talking about money, when we're talking about wealth, when we're talking about all of these attainments in this world of death and game of lies, that's all dead, right? Render unto Caesar and let the dead bury the dead have the same meaning. It's letting you know, and that's what Jesus meant when he responded with a question about tax paying. He said, render unto Caesar, meaning, well, it's dead anyway. The money's dead anyway. So if that's what Caesar wants and is requesting under penalty of death, by the way, so Caesar's saying, if you don't give him the death that he's requesting, that the punishment for that is death. And so Christ says, render unto Caesar. Render. What does render mean? Right? It's the fat of the land. So what do you mean? Rendering of fat? You never heard that term? That fat is rendered? Render. To cause to become. To pass down, to make over as a return, to give back, to deliver. See, so to give back to Caesar what Caesar is in the process of gathering for himself, which is what? Death. Within the context of what? Not life, death. Caesar being the strongest and the most powerful representation of what? Death. Let the dead bury the dead. Let Caesar have all of this death. Let him figure out what to do with it. See? To convert waste animal tissue into a usable byproduct. That's what I'm saying with render. Or to have fat melt off meat from cooking. So if the meat, right, if humanity is an animal, right, and this is the fat of the land, right, render in that context means Caesar, in operating the government, he's the source of the fire that's causing the substance, right, to melt away from the carcass of the animal of society, and he values that. And he says, we're going to take this and we're going to turn it into a byproduct. And all Jesus said is, he took a look at a system of things and said, well, if that's what the person who's in charge of the system of things demands, go ahead and let him have the death that he demands. Meaning in the form of, if the person's working a job, if Caesar says that I owe taxes, all he's saying is, let him have it. Now, did Jesus say, go get a job, accrue tax liability? No. Jesus lived an example of not working a job and not generating a tax liability. So I think in that context, the issue for Benton was in the past when he unknowingly thought it was okay, right? Especially following the example of the Christians. It's just okay and expected to work a normal job and to accrue a tax liability. And then surprise, surprise, Caesar doesn't come around and say, hey man, you owe us, where is it? If a person works W-2, the government takes it. The government renders off the fat and requires the employer to give that to Caesar. See what we're saying? But then the system of things wants to pressure and then say, well, Benton, it's for you to go off and define yourself in relation to this system. And most people work W-2 jobs. Well, I won't know until it happens, but I'm almost certain that I'm not going to work a W-2 anymore. And so this is back to, I can't say for sure. I mean, who knows? At some point in the future, I might be, after the truck driving, maybe I'll be homeless, and eventually it's just like, oh, well, I'll go get a job at CVS or whatever, right? Now we're back on a W-2. I won't know till it happens. See, I can't just make these pronouncements. And see, this is part of like the religion trip or the preaching trip, or, it's this idea that, well, I'm going to predict ahead of time, what does this thing look like? I had no way of predicting 5 years ago that, when I went into truck driving in 2018, I had no idea of knowing that this was going to express this way with a 1099 and not paying taxes. Hang on, I got to answer this call. The clown show continues. Gotta love that. Anyway, that's a lot to process. Give me a moment. We got to hit the road. Oh, man. See, this guy got in trouble for not doing his job properly. So he's getting chewed out. So I guess he thinks that shit rolls downhill, but not in this case. But I just listen to him mostly. It is interesting though, getting talked to a certain type of way, and by somebody who's his boss is the owner's not happy about whatever, but he's calling me on the phone having an important conversation, but then 3 minutes in, he's got to put me on hold and go answer another call, right? And so I would have told him, but there was never a time to actually say this, but it's like, well, you're talking to me like this is all very important, and it undermines, your message when the next thing I know, I'm being put on hold and just waiting around for you to come back. Like, is this important or not? And then this idea of the account, can't lose these accounts. It's like, yeah, but I'm pretty sure I'm not the one. I'm pretty sure I'm not the one in charge of getting the accounts or losing the accounts, And, it's a very interesting thing overall. Bear with me, though. We're doing what we need to do to hit the road. And then again, we talk about the sensitive internal space, and feeling, in the past that I would have been willing to internalize some of this, whatever's gone wrong with this load, and then sort of seeing the futility even in my own desire to explain, like, because I had no choice but to take a nap last night. There's nothing I can do. If I get into a position where I have to take a nap, I have to take a nap for safety. I can't do anything about that. There's nothing I can do about the fact that at a certain point I'm not safe to drive. Meanwhile, how many miles did I drive yesterday? Let's see. It probably won't tell me because it's split up between 2 days. Yeah, I don't even know. But see, they screwed up the load, not me, because they assumed that I knew how to run my clock for what they wanted me to do, but they never told me. Number one, they never told me what they wanted me to do. Number two, even if they had told me ahead of time what I was going to be doing, they never told me how I was expected to run my clock. Right. So they set me up to fail. And then now And this actually, it's interesting because it really does directly tie into one thing on these Freightliners, man. These switches for these lights they never work right. I'm pressing the button and nothing's happening. Finally, it went off. And then one of the very helpful aspects of my personality is that I'm quite willing to err on the side of accepting blame, right, when it's appropriate. But then I'm also really good at not feeling like I've done anything wrong when I know I haven't done anything wrong. It's like, yeah, I get this. And I almost got to the point where he was talking about the problems and this and that. It's probably fortunate that the phone rang and he had to go away, because I was probably just about to say, well, I hope you realize that if I was never born, you'd still be dealing with all these problems. Like, it's not that, there's all these problems and Jason's involved, and now Jason is the reason for the problems. I hope we can all agree that if Jason was never born, all of these problems would still exist, right? Only thing I don't like about this truck stop, man, is I'm remembering it's a bitch to get out of here. But yeah, we made it. But yeah, it's interesting, man. It's very interesting. And so the internal space, feeling a little bit of healing, because like, as he's talking to me towards the end, it's like I could feel that thing that's normal to feel like when somebody's in trouble or whatever, right? Feeling a little bit of that, but then realizing, well, that's not what I am. That's not appropriate. It's actually false identification if I play into that. See, but knowing that what I'm feeling is actually, it's the leftover vestiges of, falsely identifying in the past, and then taking on guilt and shame. It's mockery and ridicule. It's fear, guilt, and shame via mockery and ridicule. I mean, ultimately is what we're talking about. So then when people become angry and the boss is mad, then now it's okay, what has Benton done that we can say he's guilty for? Well, he stops and goes to the grocery store, right? Or, last night he stopped for an hour and a half. So, how can we make him feel shame for stopping? Like, well, you can't, because I have to for safety. But then also with the language barrier and the cultural barrier, my own communication with him just needs to be, yeah, I had to stop to take a nap. But here's another problem is here's how humans work, and this is how Eastern Europeans work, is, European males are primarily bullshit artists, right? They're bullshit artists. So in their world, if it's 2 a.m. and they got a girlfriend in town or whatever, they know they can stop at some rest area and their girlfriend, some lady they met will come visit them and have a roll in the hay. Well, they know whenever, if it comes up later on because, well, it was a critical load and it was late, why were you at the rest area for an hour and a half? Oh, well, I had to take a nap for safety. Well, some people drive a truck and they don't ever have to take a nap for safety, right? If I run my regular schedule, if I get up at midnight, I'm good to drive. I don't need a nap. If I've been awake since 4 a.m. and I've been up all day and it's getting to be my normal bedtime, right? It's getting to be my normal time, and then I have to take a nap because I'm not safe to drive. And if I cause an accident and people are badly injured or die, then I go to literally off to prison with you, sir, state prison.